today to talk about an important topic, exploring the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on micro, small, and medium enterprises. Before we begin, I would like to remind you to keep your microphone and your camera deactivated at all times. My name is Enson Sibanda, and I'm the Chief of National Strategies and Capacity Building Research in the Division for Sustainable Development Goals in UNDESA. To kickstart our discussions, I would like to invite Alex Trepakov to set the stage by making some opening remarks. Mr. Trepakov is the officer in charge of the Division for Sustainable Development Goals in the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. From 2010 to 2018, he served as Director of the Financing for Development Office of DESA. Mr. Trepakov, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Amson. Can everybody see and hear me? Distinguished participants, dear colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen, as you all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has caused a devastating socioeconomic impact around the world. According to the latest United Nations report, World Economic Situation and Prospects as of mid-2020, the global economy is projected to shrink by 3.2% this year and only modestly recover in 2021. The cumulative output losses during the next 2 years are estimated at $8.5 trillion, wiping out nearly all output gains of the previous 4 years. World trade is forecast to contract by nearly 15% in 2020 amid sharply reduced global demand and disruptions in global supply chain. With nearly 90% of the economy under some form of lockdown, unemployment rates have soared worldwide, exacerbating poverty and inequalities within and between countries. The transportation, travel, tourism, retail, and hospitality sectors bear the brunt of job losses, as these jobs typically require close physical proximity with clients and fellow workers. The pandemic has disproportionately hurt low-skilled, low-wage workers, pushing an estimated 34.3 million people into extreme poverty, with 56% of this increase occurring in African countries. Developing countries, especially those dependent on tourism and commodity exports, face heightened economic risks. The least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, small island developing states, and sub-Saharan Africa face particular vulnerabilities and are likely to suffer huge economic losses. Falling exports and growth are rapidly undermining their debt sustainability against the backdrop of reduced trade, tourism, and remittance flows, decreased foreign direct investment, and tightened credit. The pandemic has also exerted a blow on the food systems, with particular risks for food importing developing countries. To minimize the fallout of the crisis, governments around the world have rolled out large but uneven fiscal stimulus measures, equivalent overall to roughly 10% of the world GDP. However, most developing countries, saddled with chronic fiscal deficits and high level of public debt, coupled with diminished access to liquidity and credit, are constrained in their ability to implement necessary and adequate fiscal response, which has thus far averaged less than 1% of their GDP. In the immediate term, the increased availability and rapid deployment of international funds to address liquidity shortages and free up fiscal space are paramount. Micro, small, and medium enterprises represent majority of business entities worldwide, contributing a significant share of employment and GDP. MSMEs in developing countries are frequently concentrated in the manufacturing, service, and tourism sectors, which are highly
Alex, I think we have lost you.
Thank you. Let me repeat. Micro, small, and medium enterprises represent majority of business entities worldwide, contributing a significant share of employment and GDP. MSMEs in developing countries are frequently concentrated in the manufacturing, service, and tourism sectors, which are highly susceptible to external shocks. The drastic drop in international tourism and travel has put many MSMEs that make up some 80% of the global tourism sector at high risk, rendering millions jobless in many tourism-dependent countries. Unlike bigger enterprises, MSMEs lack sufficient cash reserves to weather external shocks, and they are less able to tap emergency credit. Moreover, informal and unregistered enterprises, which represent the majority of MSMEs in developing countries, are left with very few ways to seek support. Without targeted policy measures to improve MSME resilience to the crisis, survival of many MSMEs may be jeopardized, and their contributions to the crisis response and recovery will be seriously constrained. MSMEs support will be crucial for accelerating recovery, building resilience, and putting the world back on the trajectory of sustainable development. This webinar aims to explore the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on MSMEs with a view to assessing progress and identifying gaps in policy measures adopted by countries to support MSMEs in immediate response to the current crisis. Looking ahead, our discussions should also serve to inform policy options for enhancing MSME resilience to withstand external shocks and fostering sustainable development in the medium and longer term. I look forward to an interesting and fruitful discussion. Thank you. Over, back to you, Amsa.
Thank you, Alex, for the opening remarks. As you rightly point out, the COVID-19 pandemic is causing an enormous pain and suffering in all countries, and there's a high level of uncertainty about the cause of this disease and its economic and social implications. We don't know when this crisis will end. However, there is agreement that the pandemic is now threatening the implementation of the SDGs and will likely roll back achievements already made in many areas. The pandemic has battered economies, pushing tens of millions of people back into extreme poverty and hunger. Inequalities between and within countries are also on the rise. To examine these issues in great detail, our lead speaker is Dr. Ayman El Tarabishi, who is Executive Director of the International Council for Small Business. He is also the Deputy Chair of the Department of Management at the George Washington School of Business. His work involves bringing the principles of humane entrepreneurship to the forefront of entrepreneurship education, in addition to promoting the voices and visibility of MSMEs. Mr. Ayman, you have the floor. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes.
Great. And can we have the slides up? Thank you very much. Greetings. I would like to thank Mr. Alexander and Dessa for inviting ICSB, the International Council for Small Business, and myself to the event. We're very honored and privileged to be sharing our thoughts on this. Let me start here, and then if we can go to, let me start. As MSMEs represent the largest population of enterprises around the globe, accounting for 50% of enterprises, they also represent the largest group of people who are suffering from the current health, social, and economic crisis. Therefore, when we speak about MSMEs, we need to put in perspective that includes the company and also the owner and the people working there. Ironically, despite MSMEs' work that truly upholds national economies, these businesses are often not provided the same support from their government, which is needed now and for the next couple of years. Expectations for dramatic increases in losses as world trade quickly drops. The pandemic has touched every MSME, some positively, but more negatively. Our role in the International Council for Small Business is to make the information available, widespread, and to connect researchers and supporters of MSMEs with the MSMEs themselves. Next slide, please. All right, the stimulus package on the individual and MSMEs in months now in the pandemic and in place where many economies are starting to reopen, right? The pandemic has taken quite a toll on smaller units who do not create their businesses plans around emergency funding or backup measures. Stimulus packages and unemployment opportunities are the currently safety net. There have been a wide variety of stimulus packages offered globally. However, it is certain that the nations that have centered their programs around the individual, as well as the smaller units in their economy, example MSMEs, will bounce back quicker than those that push those in the bottom society further down. I'd like to mention New Zealand has done an exceptional job on supporting MSMEs. Therefore, it is necessary to note that many developing nations are already stuck in deficit with incredible public debt. So the nations that need the most and best stimulus packages seem to be those that are unable to provide them. And that's very unfortunate. Can we go to the next slide, please? It is important to remember that through all of this, that MSMEs are made of humans. Therefore, to understand the full scope of suffering on MSMEs from COVID, we must look carefully at the trend for individuals. The two most prominent groups that have been affected by COVID are women and the youth in all nations. However, specifically in sub-Saharan Africa and small island developing states. Currently, only 5% of aid is aimed at women's needs. 184 million fewer women own a mobile phone than men. Only 45% of women globally are connected to the internet, whereas 50% of the global population is connected, and only 2% of venture funding went to female founders. Okay, so we take this, we add a global pandemic during which many schools and childcare services have closed, where many responsibilities in the home have significantly increased and work from home orders are mandated. Working full-time in the home does not curate the entrepreneurship ecosystem necessary to innovate and produce higher or better productivity for the pandemic. Additionally, informal enterprises offer limited security and support. As women make up the majority of informal workers, they experience disproportionate suffering at this time. Let us look at the youth. 3 out of 4 young people work in the informal economy, which does not provide job security, especially in moments like this. Pre-COVID-19, there were 126 million youth working while living in poverty. We want to thank the ILO for these numbers. Global trends for the youth have still yet to recover from the 2008 economic crisis. Statistics from the ILO detail that in the calmer times, for every 1 percentage point increase in the adult unemployment rate, youth unemployment rises by 2.1%. We need to deal with the youth issue. So far, I've given you a very negative and maybe pessimistic picture, but let's turn a little bit to a positive trend. Can we go to the next slide, please? Frugal innovation. The mandates for staying at home, social distancing, and in some cases, physical shutdown and closure has placed unprecedented limits on us. So how can we innovate with limited resources in a way that will create products and services that are accessible to all? In taking a step back, we might see the solution more easily. The solution being that we must do better with less. Introducing the concept of frugal innovation is important. Frugal innovation is not just a method, nor a set of principles, but more a meta paradigm. By doing more with less, we are directed to 2 essential truths. It is necessary to focus on creating more value and to minimize scarce resources while maximizing intangible ones. How can we optimize delivery of value while using all the available tangible and intangible resources? Mr. Alexander talked very well about the SDGs. Let's go to the next slide, please. The Sustainable Development Goals. Frugal innovation has less resources to make products and services that are available to all. What can we focus this on? Well, if we are looking for sustainable change, we then have to reach the MSMEs and how to leverage them. The SDGs seek to eliminate and absolutely end all social, economic, and environmental abuses at play in our current systems. They are purposely designed to interrelate with each other, meaning that if a group of businesses work on 1 or 2, they end up working on all of the SDGs. They are interconnected. Because MSMEs again represent over 50% of the economy, it makes them the perfect sector to begin working to create and disseminate newly created systems and aid the local community while working from a global perspective. We can guide entrepreneurs and MSMEs to engage with this paradigm of frugal innovation to create jobs and to promote the Sustainable Development Goals. Finally, looking forward. Next slide, please. These realities can be seen as quite depressive, yet they also provide us with an arena and show us what we need to do. For example, by viewing the world with eyes of opportunity, we can see that young people will have an advance in re-entering the market post-COVID-19 since it is safer for them. Additionally, the important work being practiced by the UN, DESA, ILO, UNCTAD, and ICSB is centering these vulnerable populations in our programming to create innovative solutions for a better world. Currently, however, we need to let go of expectations and remember that the work that is administered at this moment is shaping our new world, our new normal. So rather than spending too much time hypothesizing on future trends, we must advocate for measures that uplift our humanity rather than demean it. Without expecting what the results might look like, we can still set forth on the road of humane entrepreneurship right now. Thank you very much. Over back to you.
Yes, thank you very much for your very engaging presentation. I think I'll ask questions towards the end when everyone else has made their presentation. And for those who are online, Can you also send your questions via the chat box so that at least we can pose those questions at the end? Our second speaker is Ms. Asteria Kabete, who is the Regional Director in the Department of Trade and Industry in the Philippines. She has extensive experience working with micro, small, and medium enterprises in the Philippines, including working as a small business counselor. Ms. Asteria, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Sibanda. Ladies and gentlemen, a very pleasant evening. It is 9 p.m. here in the Philippines, and I think I am the only one awake in this neighborhood, in this curfew and quarantine regime. Today is my 65th day on quarantine and on work from home status. I thank the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs for mounting this webinar, giving us this very rare opportunity to share a situation on Cebu City and maybe on the Philippines, zooming in on the micro, small, and medium enterprises under COVID-19. The Philippines is an archipelago in Southeast Asia, and Cebu City is in the central Visayas region, in the middle of the archipelago. The ongoing pandemic started spreading on the Philippines on March 7. On March 17, the President Duterte declared the Philippines under a state of calamity for a period of tentative for 6 months. Reported COVID cases started very fast, but as a result of enhanced community quarantine, we saw a flattening of the curve. Mortality also leveled off at the national level. But we have a different picture in the Visayas, the place where we are in. That's where Cebu City is. We saw a very slow outbreak from the start, but it started to go up when clustering of cases were observed in the city. Mortality is very low at 1.4%, but there is a need to be very vigilant in clusters of cases. As I speak, records show that Cebu City has the highest number of cases in the country. Businesses are expected to reel from the effects of government restrictions on industries and the public under an enhanced community quarantine in Metro Manila and in Cebu City. Please take note, Please take note that the density of positive cases is directly correlated to the density of establishments and employment of affected areas. In the Philippines, highest cases are in the National Capital Region, that's in Manila, and Cebu City, where employment and number of establishments are high. 26% of the total number of establishments in the region are in Cebu City. These are mostly manufacturing of electronics parts, business process outsourcing, construction and exports, and tourism. 11% of total employment in the region are in Cebu City. This translates to 81,000 in high-risk category, therefore not allowed to work, not allowed to operate for the duration of the quarantine. Zooming in on the construction industry, 70% of all construction firms were not allowed to operate, halting projects worth $147 million contract value. However, under the easing of the quarantine protocol starting this week, they can now fully operate, but some are allowed 50% only, except in Cebu City. During the quarantine period, which started middle of March, less than 25% of total establishments in the country, and so with other regions, were able to operate. 95% of these establishments are micro, small, and medium in size. The tourism industry and the entire value chain, which is a major economic driver in Cebu, was worst hit at the start. All hotels, resorts, and restaurants were closed. However, when the government started to accommodate stranded overseas foreign workers and health frontline workers were also provided with accommodation facilities, the industry, the tourism industry, occupancy, it improved to 90% because their facilities were used as quarantine and isolation areas. Another help which boosted the operations of the tourism industry is business process outsourcing, when government required that these BPOs provides accommodation for their workers. That brings the occupancy of the industry to 90%. Restaurants remain open, but no dine-in, only for food delivery. With this very bleak global scenario, we have to act fast to stay above water at least. The national government has come up with measures to mitigate the impact of COVID-19. In the House of Representatives, a proposed Philippine Economic Stimulus Act of 2020 that provides resources to help the economy recover from this crisis. This will cover the following urgent needs: expanded infrastructure program on health care, education, and food security, put up a national emergency and investment corporation to help distressed firms, grant of interest-free loans to assist micro and small and medium enterprises, set up a credit mediation and restructuring guarantee fund to assist critically impacted businesses, and wage subsidies to affected workers, including overseas Filipino workers who lost their jobs due to the pandemic. On the part of the Regional Operations Group of the Trade and Industry Department, where I belong, we did a mapping for our dashboards to consider the changes under the new normal. And the new normal would look like this. There will be limited movement of people, of course. People expecting work, and they also expect grants from government. Communications, high-speed connectivity is a must. Health protocols are mandatory. Repurposing, emergence of new business models. Shift of consumer preferences to healthy, natural wellness products and services. Online shopping, e-commerce, and resurgence of BPOs. Okay. We then came up with priority programs for immediate implementation. The Department of Trade and Industry, through the Small Business Corporation, is providing the COVID-19 assistance to restart enterprises or CARES program for SMEs. Participants are MSMEs who were in operation for at least a year before the pandemic, and they are affected by the imposition of these quarantines and government regulations. The Negosyo Servicio sa Barangay links programs for SMEs in remote areas of the country. This is where livelihood seeding programs is funneled to micro enterprises in remote rural areas. The Shared Service Facilities Project is a major component of DTI's MSME development program and aims to improve the competitiveness of MSMEs by providing them with machinery, equipment, tools, systems, skills, and knowledge under a shared system. Fab Labs is highlighted in this program, making it easy for our micro, small, and medium enterprises in their product development as they repurpose to PPEs or personal protective equipment. The Control Beef, the Control Plus Beef Reboot Package is a series of free webinars going full speed now for small and medium enterprises who need to transform their business digitally. DTI and AD partners across the entire e-commerce ecosystem provide their expertise and experiences on how to take advantage of this digital space. And here, in this intervention, we are heavy with our youth, young entrepreneurs under these interventions of the department. The DTI initiative on production of personal protective equipment is a collaborative effort of the government and private sector to develop our country's capacity to repurpose to medical-grade PPEs. We are opening the economy in Cebu little by little. There will be limited transportation for essential goods and services. Physical classes will remain suspended, while online classes continue at all levels. Critical here is how we transition from community quarantine to the new normal. We are certainly preparing our healthcare system for a possible second wave of infections. If we remain fully prepared and do everything right, we may get over this crisis much sooner and with less negative consequences to our people and to the economy. And finally, my last slide, please. Together, in this pandemic, we hope to heal as one. Thank you very much, everyone.
Situation in the Philippines, and I think you've highlighted some interesting programs that people might be interested in knowing some more about. Now I invite our third speaker, Mr. Dragan Radic, who has the Small and Medium Enterprise Unit at the International Labour Organization. Mr. Dragan has more than 10 years of ILO experience as senior specialist for employers' activities. Prior to joining the ILO, Mr. Radic was a chief executive officer of Akuro Health Insurance in New Zealand and business services manager of New Zealand Nurses Organization. Mr. Dragan, you have 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Do you see me? Do you hear me? First test, right? All good? Could I have my presentation, please, up? Okay, so basically, I have only 10 minutes. Thank you very much for inviting me on behalf of the ILO. And I'm here in Geneva. It's 3:30, and it would be good if somebody could mute their mic. Yes, thank you. Okay, so in my presentation, I'm going to quickly touch on impact of COVID-19 on SMEs, because I think we all know what it is. And I would like to go through some policy measures, not what we are seeing now, but I'd like to go a little bit more ahead and to see what we might need soon and tomorrow. And I cannot really resist, although I have limited time, to touch upon the huge elephant in the room, which is informality. So next slide, please. For those who are not familiar, just to introduce briefly the ILO. This is a specialized UN agency. We are known for decent work vision. We are custodian of the SDG 8. We deal with international labor standards and many other important areas like social protection, social dialogue, and so on. And the SMU unit that I lead is there to support the self-employed and micro SMEs to start and to grow, but not in any way, but to grow sustainably and to create more and better jobs. Next slide, please. Now, when you look at the SMEs, small is really big, but collectively, you know, we all know the numbers. But I just want to point out to our report that we published for my unit in 2019, where we actually looked at, in particular, self-employed and micro firms that are often missed from various statistics, and informal economy. That was hard to go there to actually get that data. But look, the smallest economic unit, which is self-employed, micro and small, up to 49 workers, employ globally 70% of the workforce. It's a huge number. And we know that even on a good day, they struggle because they are fragile, they are light on cash, light on asset, they have poor productivity, have poor working conditions, problems with access to technology, and so on. But what happens when the day actually turns bad? Can I have next slide, please? So then we have COVID-19, right? And those SMEs and micro firms are being hit at the same time from the supply side and from the demand side, right? So supply chains are gone. They can't get the raw materials. They can't produce. Their workforce is in lockdown mode. The orders are being canceled. They are losing revenues. They're closing shops. And we are seeing basically a massive job losses. The ILO has estimated that in this quarter, end of this quarter, we're going to see 300 million jobs that are already lost, right? So what we did also, we wanted to find out ourselves what's going on. So we conducted the global survey through our global programs that we have on productivity and working conditions. And we actually discovered that 7 out of 10 businesses were already closed and 9 out of 10 experienced major cash crisis. But in all that bad news, there was a bit of light out of the tunnel, and we've seen some good stories emerging in new business models. Next slide. So then the policy response. I mean, this is quite complicated matrix, and I don't want to go too much into details. But basically, the ILO is saying, look, to fight this crisis, there are 4 key pillars we need to focus on. And I'm going to just focus a little bit now on the pillar 2. And what we've seen is because the crisis initially for SMEs, it was all about the cash and liquidity crisis. So what the governments did, they provided financial support. They focused on giving SMEs special credit lines, giving them some grants, cash in hands, and also reducing operating costs by providing tax relief, social contribution reliefs, even rent and utility payments, And what was really welcomed by many, I think, was really wage subsidies. And that was really to keep not only SMEs afloat, but also their workers afloat. Some went further and figured out that SMEs might be able to trade among themselves, so they created digital platforms, and there was extension of social protection in some countries. At the ILO, we have a web page. There is a database which capturing 180 countries who did what on policy response. So I would rather focus a little bit more further. So next slide, please. So now in Europe, we are seeing reactivation of businesses. So what we wanted to know really, what does that mean? And we asked the SME agencies and businesses, what is priority, SMEs, what is really needed? And the first thing you get very, very clear and loud is we need help with post-COVID-19 return to business model. Basically meaning, I'm going to restart my business. How do I make sure that my workers don't get sick by virus again? How do I organize it, my workplace? The other thing, what we see a lot is business continuity and resilience support, because SMEs are worried, we don't know whether we're going to actually go back to recovery one day or whether we're going to go back to lockdown. And they're very, very worried about the second wave, and business continuity is there. Then the access to finance, this is always a problem, even on a good day. Here on a bad day, we're going to need it even more, but different access. It has to be fast, simple, no red tape, And I think the government will continue to provide some risk-sharing facilities to make this happen. But it's not the answer. Then we've seen that digitalization was actually quite a good solution for a number of SMEs to bounce back. So I think there will be lots of work in that area. And what we've been talking about for years, it's enabling business environments. What we need to see finally is a business environment for SMEs that is more predictable, that is simple, that is fair and transparent. And at the end of the day, why is that important? Because government cannot just keep paying for recovery. They are running out of cash. And we are operating, or should be operating, in a market economy, right? So we need to create the conditions for private sector to lead that growth now in recovery. Next slide. And then, the third phase, eventually when we get to recovery, the question is, what kind of recovery are we talking about? Can we actually rebuild something that is better, that is safer, more sustainable? And here there will be big ticket items, economic and structural transformation, public investments in infrastructure, and so on. And we would need to really different partnerships, global partnerships that are actually more strategic and overall wrapped by a really, good, solid social dialogue, meaningful social dialogue. We need to bring employers and workers on board. Next slide, please. Let me now turn to elephant in the room. 62% of global workforce is engaged in the formal economy. So what we did in our unit just a couple of days ago, and we are launching this tomorrow, we wanted really to see, to zoom in a little bit more and to see who is providing jobs in those 7 sectors that we know that are at huge risk. And when you look at it, the self-employed and micro firms in those 7 sectors at risk provide over 800 million jobs. And 8 out of 10, 640 million are in informal economy. Now, that is where the sense of urgency must be. That is where we might have a crisis from economic to actually humanitarian if we don't deal with this properly. Next slide, please, and I'm concluding now. So what are the policy challenges when we come to informality? The first one is really the fiscal space. In the countries where you have high informality, you have normally low fiscal space. And then now you have to balance the health and economic crisis. And on top of that, how do you balance formal and informal? It's really challenging, right? And then we have to provide support to governments to understand what kind of measures. Are we talking something quick, like short-term cash transfers, payments of utilities? Are we talking about systematic measures such as social protection, And then it's not easy to even identify those needs, because I was shocked to read that 1 billion people in the world have no even formal IDs. So how do you figure out who these people are? Which mechanism do you find to distribute support? And at the end of the day, and I'm concluding, is this not really an opportunity to try to actually do formalization in a practical way, to actually help workers and SMEs to register in order to gain some support, but also to say, look, it would be fair now, for you to actually start contributing to the tax and social contribution. I mean, do we have option? I don't think so. I'm concluding here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dragan, for your very stimulating presentation. And I'm sure the audience already has burning questions, and I can see some questions already in the chat box. Our last speaker is Ms. Maja Dabagi, who is Director of Green and Inclusive Growth, International Chamber of Commerce. Ms. Dabagi leads the ICC Commission on Environment and Energy, leading business engagement that promotes inclusive economic growth in line with the UN Climate Change and Sustainable Development Goals. She is also the UNFCCC focal point for business and the industry non-governmental organizations, promoting the private sector commitment to the implementation of the Paris Agreement by showcasing private sector leadership and action and providing constructive policy input from business to the UNFCCC process. Ms. Dabagi, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you very much, Anson, for the introduction. And thank you for inviting me to be a part of this discussion today. I'm really pleased to be here with you and to share with you some of the work that we've been doing at the International Chamber of Commerce to help address the impacts of COVID-19 on lives and livelihoods. So following on some really excellent presentations that were made, and I've had an opportunity to look at the questions that you've asked both in the chat and prior to the event. So I'll try to address as many of those questions as possible in the next 10 minutes. I'll first just give you a brief introduction of the ICC and take you quickly through our global COVID response. And then I really would like to focus a little bit more on our campaign to save our SMEs, SOS, and the unique role that chambers of commerce can play in supporting micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises during this unprecedented time, but also during the recovery phase and the post-recovery phase. So we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So very quickly, for those of you who may not be familiar with the International Chamber of Commerce, we were founded in 1919 by a group of individuals who had the conviction that we could help secure world peace through world trade. And today, ICC is the institutional representative for over 45 million companies all over the world, really all sizes, sectors, and geographies. And we're present in over 100 countries through regional offices, but also through our extensive network of chambers of commerce. We can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So just leveraging on this unique role that ICC plays, both at the international level through our engagement in the highest levels of intergovernmental decision-making, but also at the national level through our grassroots efforts. We have taken a global response to COVID, really adopting a whole of organization approach to the COVID pandemic, and really refocusing all of our activities on the impacts of COVID-19 on health, on society, and also on the global economy. Our activities have ranged from ensuring proper information flows, notably with the partnership we have with the World Health Organization, but also advocacy in terms of the emergency response and the development of tools such as a business continuity guide, but also a health guidance and family-friendly business guidance. So I think we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. In our overall global COVID response, one of the major concerns that we've had has been the devastating effects of COVID-19 on MSMEs and the workforce. So we've launched a campaign called Save Our SMEs, and that's what I really would like to spend a little bit of time talking to you about today. So SOS campaign was launched at the end of March, calling for decisive action by all stakeholders to save our SMEs and, by extension, the principal drivers of global economic activity. The campaign has three main objectives. One is to shine a spotlight on the devastating effects of COVID-19 on SMEs and also their employees. The second is to ensure effective policy and fiscal responses, both at the international and national level. And the third is to provide resources and tools for small business to help them navigate the unprecedented economic shock and also the post-recovery landscape. So we've recently launched a platform. I think you should be able to see the website on your screens. And this is really intended to be a one-stop shop for policy recommendations, for tools, but also for funding resources and free services for small businesses globally. And so please do have a look at that website after this event. And should you have any resources that you'd like to see shared on this platform, please feel free to contact me or to contact the SOS mailbox that is on the website. Super, thank you. So just a really quick overview of the site. You'll find our calls to action, so a government call to action, a corporate call to action, and also an open letter from our Secretary General to finance ministers. And then there are deep dives into very specific policy responses from trade, trade finance, tax, customs, but also policy responses are being developed for vulnerable groups such as migrant workers and women, which we've heard a little bit about in the previous presentations. And also, as I mentioned, support, both funding support and also free services. So I just want to focus very quickly on our policy and advocacy actions before moving to the unique role that chambers of commerce can play. Our corporate call to action sets out the multinational or the actions that multinational corporations can take to preserve their supply chains, their operations, and their workforce, and also demonstrate a commitment to stakeholder capitalism. The government call to action calls on governments and multilateral institutions to work together to ensure that stimulus efforts flow into the real economy, and of course, in particular to those who are most vulnerable to the economic disruptions. And our letter to finance ministers sets out the best practices that can ensure support measures reach MSMEs quickly, and that financial support is provided through the channels most used by MSMEs. So this can include guaranteeing emergency loans or fast-tracking low-value liquidity loans, but also using digital or mobile platforms where possible. So those are the top-level interventions, but as I mentioned, there are also very specific policy recommendations on the website, and I would invite you to review those at your leisure, but also share with us any resources, again, that you would like to see shared on the platform. So that takes us to, yes, the next. Whoever's controlling the slides is fabulous. Thank you. So the unique role of chambers of commerce. So we know that unfortunately COVID-19 has compounded existing inequalities, and that many countries are trying to confront health and socio-economic impacts of COVID in the context of already existing hardships from political unrest, to fragile economies, or trying to rebuild after natural disasters. And so taking into account the realities on the ground is very important in terms of how we respond. And I think that chambers of commerce are incredibly close to the realities on the ground and the landscape, the business landscape on the ground, and so have been working extremely hard over the past months to support MSMEs. Dragan, he mentioned a number of key issues that have arisen from the survey. I've noted these down: business continuity, access to finance, digitalization, the enabling business environment, but also recovery and informality. And I noted those down because this is where chambers of commerce can really assist with all of these key issues for business, and in fact they are assisting in that respect. I wanted to share some of the what I know chambers of commerce in our network are particularly focused on at the moment. One is access to information, and they're finding that the MSMEs in our network are finding it incredibly difficult to follow the speed at which measures are being taken and being modified, whether these are health measures or access to support or customs and trade regulations. And so chambers of commerce are really able to be this lifeline and help MSMEs navigate this information quickly. The issue of rapid support is really critical as well. As we know and has been said in the previous presentations, the cash flow reserves are very small for MSMEs, and on average, these cash flow reserves are between 2 weeks to 2 months. And we also know that 40 to 60% of MSMEs that close during a disaster never reopen. So clearly the support needs to reach MSMEs incredibly quickly to be effective. And chambers are serving as a hub for disseminating important information about the critical needs and concerns of MSMEs to help inform government action and the kind of support that can be helpful to MSMEs. So the final issue that I wanted to mention as well is just the time-bound nature of relief measures. Often the support that's being provided is intended to bridge a couple of months to help MSMEs stay afloat during the height of the pandemic and the lockdown measures, but clearly MSMEs are going to face a changing economic landscape that will affect them for months and years to come. So if we want to secure the investment made during this emergency period, it's really necessary to also ensure that MSMEs have the long-term support necessary. And so whether it's access to finance or the deep needs to digitalize or how to absorb future shocks and be resilient, the Chambers of Commerce will be essential to helping provide MSMEs with these concrete tools and help them to absorb future shocks. So just in closing, I'd like to leave you with one final reflection before we head into the Q&A. Just to say that, while the world is very different to the one that we had in 1919 when the International Chamber of Commerce was first created, it's clear that we're at the same or at a similar inflection point in history, and that we have a decision to make in terms of the kind of future that we want to have. Certainly, for an organization like ours that's very much driven by the purpose to secure peace, prosperity, and opportunity for all, we believe that we need to double down on our efforts to avoid the collapse of the global economy and ensure a more resilient and inclusive, sustainable future. And MSMEs are going to be a very critical part of this future as we see it. So thank you very much. I'll pass it back to Ansan.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dabagi, for that very interesting presentation. Now I think we can go into some questions. So to kickstart our discussions, basically some of you did submit some questions in advance, and some of you have been posting some questions in the chat box. So I've picked up a few questions. So the first questions are directed at Mr. Amen. Mr. Olaposi from the University of Obafemi in Nigeria would like to know, countries are adopting policy measures to support MSMEs during the pandemic. What are effective strategies to identify those who really need the support? And there's another question from Ashka. What is the role of MSEs in critical raw material supply during the pandemic? How did the pandemic influence the global supply chain of critical raw materials? Maybe if you can just try to give us something in 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much. These are exceptional questions here, and they're very important here. In terms of policies or government policies to support them, we've seen ICSB has seen many different various variations of it, from going directly to small businesses, loaning them directly to small businesses, or going through governments here. And it's a mismatch of results here. And because in some countries, when you go through to banks to support MSMEs, what we've realized is that sometimes these MSMEs do not have access or the relationships with banks to actually get the loans they need. And they don't work with banks extensively, while some larger businesses or medium-sized businesses have better relationships with banks. So that was somewhat conflicting or caused some problems for micro businesses and small businesses because there's an intermediary there. So there needs to be some way of looking at how to get direct access, policy implications, how to get direct access to micro and small businesses, which may cause a problem for banks, because banks will say that's our role in society to be that middle person here. So that's something that needs to be discussed in different countries, how to have an understanding how banks play a role, but also how can governments play a role directly with MSMEs. So that's number one. Number two, regarding our supply chain here, this is a very tricky question, and it's an exceptional question here, because a lot of micro and small businesses play the role of supply chain. So we need to talk about this from a comprehensive standpoint. How can governments both protect SMEs, but also make sure that these supply chains are protected? Because we know that the big sectors, when they move very vibrantly. And here, so it needs to be a balance between how to protect the overall supply chain, but also how to protect SMEs in this. So there needs to be some serious conversations with a lot of big businesses, also with government, with procurement, to make sure that SMEs are protected within this supply chain, and especially access to raw material. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much for those quick responses. The next set of questions is directed to Ms. Asteria. Jana Pocek from Land Invest in Sweden would like to know, what are the main lessons learned from the 2008 crisis that can be applied to the current COVID-19 crisis? And maybe another follow-up question from Ms. Anna Wada, who is with the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Employment in the Gambia. What policies or programs has the government of the Philippines adopted to support MSMEs during the COVID-19 pandemic? You have the floor.
The previous crisis. And how's my audio? Is my audio okay? Okay. It's really, I would like to say that it's really the strengthening of each link in the value chain of our micro, small, and medium enterprises. And we have to do a deepened understanding of what their roles are in each link in the value chain. And we strengthen them, and government has to enable them that in times of crisis, they should be able, they're as important as each link. So they should be able, government has to enable them to be ready with any time if there's a crisis or a pandemic or a calamity, we should be resilient and business continuity should prevail. On the second question, I'd like to take off to the first question. I'd like to say something on the first question regarding the effective strategies to identify those who really need the support. Okay, in our country, we have presence in the remote areas, and now during this pandemic, we have a special window for micro enterprises coming from the Small Business Corporation, which is an attached financing institution with the Department of Trade and Industry. We at the department, we do the role of the financial microfinancing, the MFIs, microfinancing institutions. So we identify the affected MSMEs, we do vetting on their proposals, and we take on the role of the MFIs, because these are the types of affected MSMEs who don't have access to the formal banking sector. And on the specific assistance that we have, now we are assisting our micro enterprises in repurposing their existing operations to what fits in the new normal. So this is and also we are also taking the opportunity to speed up, full speed ahead on taking on the digital space for e-commerce. We are onboarding them, assisting them to be on board on e-commerce, so as they can maximize their reach in the market in this time of crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I'll come back with additional questions, but let me now go to Mr. Radic. We have a question from Ms. Hezron Osano, who is in Kenya. What is the role of international organizations in supporting MSMEs to mitigate the negative effects of COVID-19, especially in developing countries and in Africa in particular? And what programs is the UN putting in place to address the challenges that MSMEs face in the context of the current crisis? And a related question from Ms. Unami Mpofu from South Africa. What are the digital low-cost support mechanisms that can reach this group of self-employed to sustain their livelihoods? Over to you.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Great questions, but also the first one especially, it's like a webinar in itself. I'm going to try perhaps just to summarize. I think that the international community should play a key role really in strengthening the global ecosystem for SMEs and helping to get us out of this crisis. And this is why we have, for example, one UN, right? That's the idea. UN agencies getting together, responding better, acting as one. We've seen this the development of a response and recovery fund of the UN, where the UN agencies again come together and mobilize the resources and provide technical assistance in line of their expertise. So I think that's good, but I think we need to see more. I think, you know, if you look at the vision of sustainable development goals and the cost there, right? It was said that the private sector has to play a greater role, and we talked about blended finance. So I think something like this will be needed here. I think it will not be enough just for the international organizations, even to get together, it's already a good start, but it's not enough. We need to really get a private sector involved as well, and we have to work together in a big picture deal, right? And to do it strategically and to collaborate differently than what we are doing now. So just I can't tell you as to what the UN is doing, because I think it's going to take so much time, but I can tell you what the ILO is doing. So from the policy perspective, for example, we are there to provide policy advice and also technical support, not only to governments, but also to representative workers and employers organizations, how to handle this crisis. Concretely, we've been providing some rapid assessments on the impact on the labor markets of this crisis, on the rapid assessment on the informal enterprises and formalization. What does that mean for informal sector? And then we are providing some support in terms of helping governments to establish, for example, emergency unemployment funds, how to extend income protection, how to design the cash assistance schemes for informal economy. And then when it comes to SME, which is really our shop, so basically it was all about first understanding what the problem is, you know, so that was the survey, and also offering surveys to our constituents so that they can first, before they act, they can understand what are the problems, because we ought to be demand driven, right? We ought to be responding to the needs. Then what we did quickly, we also created SME policy workshop that is provided by our International Training Center in Turin, free of charge. Not many things are provided free of charge from Turin, but this is because that's important. Then what we did, we designed this return to work of COVID-19 to help SMEs to actually restart their business in a safe way. We quickly developed the business continuity planning tool that is also available online, digital, free of charge, to help SMEs to understand the challenges and to move us forward. And you know, all that, when we are doing this from the ILO perspective, it has the lens of the decent work, right? Because for us, that is the agenda. So when we are helping enterprises, it is not only for the sake of enterprises, it's actually overall, you know, to achieve this work agenda. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. Maybe I can ask you another follow-up question. Probably you can answer this one as well. It's from Mr. Elia Zulu in Nairobi. One of the key issues underlining your presentation is the need to have local evidence to help policymakers understand the socioeconomic impact of COVID-19 on people's lives. And that affordable, given that most developing countries don't have the economic muscle to do what the developed economies are doing. How do we help countries produce such evidence and build capacity to use the evidence to drive policy responses?
Okay. I think I captured the essence of your question, Mr. Sibada, because there was a bit of background noise, but I think I understand what the question was. So when we, for example, from the ILO perspective, when we designed this global survey to understand the problems as what the SMEs are facing, we did it in a way that it was immediately available to constituents as well. So Bureau for Employers Activities, ACTEM, for example, did similar thing, particularly for employers organization. And so we did the best we could for the time being to actually offer some concrete tools in hands to our constituents in order to analyze, to actually collect the data, and then we provided technical support in terms of analysis. But you know, this is just a means to an end. This is the first step. You know, based on this, what we wanted to do, and you know, when you look at, for example, the employers organization, is really to arm the voice of business, the employers organization, with the arguments based on facts, to actually sit down around the table with the government, and also we did the same for the trade unions in order to develop better policy measures. Because that's what the ILO is all about. It's about social dialogue and tripartism. So that's what I can say at this stage.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive response. And now the last set of questions I have for Ms. Dabagi. You have at least the environment background. So we have a question from Antonis Malagadis. Climate change risk adaptation measures and post-pandemic risk management for MSMEs need to go hand in hand. What are your views? And then I have another question from Venkat Nadella.
Anson, I couldn't hear the question. Could you please repeat it very quickly?
Okay, no problem. This is a question from Antonis Malagadis. Climate change risk adaptation measures and post-pandemic risk management for MSMEs need to go hand in hand. What are your views? And the second question I have for you is from Venkat Nadella, who is with the Indian Institute for Science. What are the immediate public policy, both the supply side and the demand side, responses to address the survival in the MSME sector?
Sure, yes, happy to take those questions. Thank you. And I realize that we're almost out of time, so I'll be as quick as possible. So absolutely, there's an importance in when we're thinking about the post-COVID recovery to really ensure that we have resilient business models and that we're relying on building a sustainable future to be able to absorb future shocks. And these shocks can be climate related or biological, or there could be cybersecurity threats. And so I think chambers of commerce have a real important role in ensuring that we can provide companies and MSMEs with the tools that they need to be able to build these resilient business models and sustainable ones that help us to ensure an inclusive future. And then in terms of the policy responses that are necessary, I think the most important point that I'd like to make is the importance of coherence, both at the international level and at the national level of the regulatory environment. And that's what's going to make it easiest for us to move forward. Now, hopefully that's answered the questions. I think you're on mute, Amson. I think that you're on mute.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you can always, respond in the chat box to any additional questions that you think are of interest to you. Ladies and gentlemen, I think this has been a great webinar. I know that I enjoyed it. I think I enjoyed all the presentation. But as the saying goes, all good things must come to an end. But before we close, I would like to highlight a few takeaways. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a devastating impact on micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, particularly on revenue streams and jobs. For MSMEs to recover and stay afloat, countries have to recognize that the first wave of stimulus is not enough. Ensuring a jobs-rich recovery will require stimulus packages that better target MSMEs, particularly those that need government support the most. This could be either MSMEs that are owned or operated by women, young people, persons with disability, or other disadvantaged or marginalized groups. Government programs also should address this crisis when it comes to decisions about who gets the money and how do you channel government support to the MSMEs. These are very, very important issues. Should you target large enterprises versus the small enterprises? And of course, we have seen in some countries that MSMEs got the short end of the stick when it comes to public resources. There are also issues related to redistribution and inequality that may reshape national economies, as governments probably might choose winners and losers. Government support can be transferred directly to MSMEs, but it's not easy when MSMEs are not registered or are underbanked. You can also go through banks, but of course we know that banks may not pick up these funds and distribute it properly or fairly, but of course some support can be transferred directly. While funding should stabilize existing MSMEs, it should also promote new ones, startups. And of course, the key question also is, should we keep non-productive MSMEs alive? I think that's an important issue that probably countries also need to address. And for micro, small, and medium enterprises to survive future crises, they need support to transition to e-commerce selling. This will require concerted efforts to close the digital divide. Lastly, we also need socially just societies and sustainable patterns of production and consumption. With those few words, I think this has been a wonderful webinar. We will try to put together a set of key messages from this webinar, and we'll post them on our website. So you can check on our website maybe in a week or so. I thank all of you for your participation today, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you, Amson. Thank you, everybody. Great webinar. Goodbye now.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks a lot, Amson. Thanks, everybody. Bye then.
Thank you, Elia.